There's an article that my friend Dan Mall wrote a decade ago that talks about the difference between art direction and design. And in the article, he defines art direction like this: the visceral resonance of how a piece of work feels. In other words, what you feel in your gut when you look at a website or an app or any piece of design work. Usually it's described in touchy-feely words like elegant, grungy, retro, and more. So he's trying to describe the difference between just straight up design and art direction. Art direction and design kind of combined together forms design direction, but overall direction kind of means the same thing. How does it feel? And why does it feel that way? Direction is the why and the how mixed together. Now, all of our foundational concepts from typography, layout, color, all of those are critical to master. But when you add in the why while you're designing those foundational principles, that becomes part of the direction and the style behind the direction. So you can lay out your typography perfectly. Your layout and your colors can be really nice. But without a clear vision of the direction, it won't be as powerful as it could be. And sometimes there can be a little bit of magic involved. I remember when I was back in design school, my typography professor would critique our work and he would tell us, it's just not magical yet. It just, I won't know it until I see it. And I remember getting so frustrated that he could not put his finger on why it wasn't magical. I just wanted to be told what to do. But the truth is, the magic comes from exploring and experimenting and trying things out. But the thing that helps with the whole magical process is to have that vision, to have those adjectives that you can pin towards the thing that you're working on. So let's take a look at some examples to try to demystify this magical direction. First of all, we're going to take a look at the Notion.so website. Very, very simple. Very clean usage of white and a dark text color with this simple gray and these kind of red calls to action. But if you notice, this background right here has a very, very small touch of yellow. And you can kind of see that compared to the white background here. So if you look at the block icon, which kind of resembles a child's letter block, the kind that you could stack on top of each other and you can spell words with. It's kind of what it is symbolizing, kind of this youthful, playful idea, just in the brand mark alone. But then when you add in this yellow background and these almost pen and paper kind of notebook style illustrations, and then with the red primary action, it kind of gives me a feeling of being young and being in school and having these yellow legal pads and the teacher's red marks. Now, it might not create that same sense of emotion for you, but to me, that's the feel that I get from all of these elements combined. But if you were to strip out the block and the illustrations, even if you left the colors the same, it might not have quite the same feeling. So it's very, very subtle in terms of the feeling and the direction that they have chosen to pursue. But I think it works really, really well because Notion is an incredibly powerful tool. You can use it for all kinds of different things. But boiling it down to a simple little building block and adding in these fun little illustrations and making it just seem as simple as 1, 2, 3, and then we've got our bonus number 4 here. It just kind of feels friendly and it feels like it has a kind of a, learning environment kind of vibe. You could imagine if these illustrations were multicolor, big gradients, lots of big scenery, and it had a lot more of this kind of trendy startup vibe that you see, it would have a very different feel. And I think what they've done here is they haven't over-designed it. They've gone with a very intentional direction that seems a little bit unique. Even with these secondary buttons, you can see they have this like 1 pixel stroke in light red with a slightly tinted red button. Even these icons are in red and just very, very subtle drop shadow. all of these very tiny elements all combined together create a pretty nice feel, a pretty nice direction, and they're very, very consistent with that all throughout their product. Now, something like the Notion example, it looks fairly simple, almost easy to pull off, but I can assure you, if you could go back and see all of their designers' work, they probably have iteration after iteration after test that they experimented with before they landed on that particular execution. They might have had the vision for creating this school vibe and this kind of youthful, friendly school time vibe, but it takes experimentation through your execution, through color, through typography, through your button styles and things like that before you can really nail the execution. But knowing that you have the direction and then using that as a filter for all of your design decisions, that is what helps you kind of get to that path of creating that magical design that just feels right. Now, sometimes you might have a project that already has a design direction associated with it. And maybe it's your job to pull in all of that information and then kind of execute that into an app. Maybe there's branding that exists and there's no app. And so you have to kind of figure out a way to pull that branding into a particular app. So this was a project that I worked on through an agency a long time ago for a client called Dr. Phillips Center. And it's a performing arts center, and you can kind of see this logo is meant to represent the kind of the guy that stands in front of the orchestra and does his little thing. Maybe he's a maestro, I can't remember, but whatever that guy is called, that's kind of the idea of this logo mark. And so they've created this as their brand guidelines, and they're using this pattern of that swoosh mark to show kind of all of these different treatments for the branding. They have typography, colors picked out, kind of this fruity color scheme with the orange and the red and the mango looking colors. And so they've kind of created these directions. And so it was our job to take these branding guidelines and create a new web presence for them. So they have a lot of tickets that they sell, a lot of events that they want people to come to. So they had a fairly strong brand guidelines that they wanted us to adhere to. So in this example, I simply just took this direction and started creating these element collages. So if I zoom in here, this was created, like I said, a long time ago. I did these in Photoshop. Just taking that direction, I was making decisions on the design that I wouldn't really have probably made on my own. But because I knew they had these colors, these gradients, this typography, this style, that helped me very quickly make certain decisions that was right in line with their brand, that was right in line with the vision that they had already set. So I typically wouldn't use a pink to orange gradient or a yellow call to action with kind of this peach text on top of it. This is not necessarily something that I would immediately design because I'm more drawn to the darker color schemes and kind of techie, clean, modern layouts. But it's not hard to make these decisions when you know the vision of the direction that you need to go. So in this example, I'm just laying out potential options. Here's maybe a headline. Here's a little kicker kind of eyebrow little text treatment. Maybe the color of the titles are orange. Maybe we show the attendees who've signed up as circle avatars. Kind of playing around with some rollover states where maybe this color is the kind of the most hot and dynamic color. So maybe we pull that out for the call to action, and maybe we bring in this cool background for rollover. So I'm exploring on how can we pull this direction into the way that we're executing the style. Because at a certain point, it's not hard to lay out this typography with proper spacing, good size, good color. But without the style, it might end up falling flat, especially if it's supposed to represent something that has such a strong visual direction. So I'm just kind of going through a bunch of different options. I'm just exploring, and I'm not trying to make a website. I'm just making different things that feels like Dr. Phillips Center, or at least I hope that feels that way. So a block quote with the same colorful. Another example of design direction that I want to point out is in this ExxonMobil design system. They currently had a kind of a soft style guide with particular colors. They had a font that they already had set in place. And they had a few things that we could use as raw materials. So some of the early explorations were just pasting in some of their existing style guide elements, pasting in these different forms that may or may not work with their kind of style that they were going for. And before we really locked in on a design direction, I pulled in all their colors and I just started working on one of the more difficult UI pieces, which is these kind of crazy looking tables with lots of different columns and rows, collapsible, selectable. This looks like a decent table that I designed. You can see I've got all these layers in here and I'm working on with the inside borders and really trying to nail how would a big form like this work from a UX perspective on a mobile screen versus a larger screen. So this is kind of a biggish version and this is kind of a smallish version. So how could we make this work? And so as I'm exploring with this, starting to realize that this doesn't actually fit with the design direction that we wanted to go in. So we kind of decided that this needs to be kind of a corporate, kind of a cool corporate design direction. There needs to be, imagine you've got a well-tailored suit and it's got a crisp collar and a, nice blue tie with a pressed white shirt and everything fits really nice, but there's maybe some sharp edges, not a lot of, not anything too gaudy, nothing too startup-y, nothing with a bunch of gradients, just some nice, clean, corporate, but with an edge of cool kind of color. So this was some of the early exploration that just didn't really hit that mark. This feels more like maybe like a young startup that's just trying to make some cool UI. It doesn't really have a strong direction. But you can see in some of these final applications, we are bringing in just the absolute very, very subtle gradient that gives it just that touch of cool look, but it's very sharp, very hard edge. We decided no border radius on anything. Everything's gonna be a sharp edge. Every button is gonna be fully sharp, no 1 pixel or 2 pixel radius. The icons like this, they're gonna be sharp. The icons here, and then we're gonna have these kind of prominent, dark, and stark headers for the tables with just a really, really clean and crisp layout. So this new direction, this cool corporate direction that we set for ourselves just really, really helped us to kind of nail the direction and the execution for this. So again, this is not my personal style. I wouldn't choose necessarily to design my own personal site this way. But for a huge company like ExxonMobil and their internal intranet systems, it makes a lot more sense for them. It makes sense to have this big corporate presence that doesn't feel like a startup and it doesn't have any one designer's personality injected too deeply into the design. They need it to be a little bit more, boardroom style, crisp, clean, with a touch of modern flair. And that was the design direction that we used for this project. And again, it helped us filter every decision, every execution for the typography, the border radius, and the color usage. Everything was filtered through that direction that was set early in the project. But sometimes you don't have a strong design direction when you first get started. And what do you do when you have something that you're starting from scratch and maybe you have an idea of what you think it might be, but you're not really sure yet? Well, sometimes it just helps to kind of come up with some adjectives like, okay, I want this to be fresh and modern, and I want this to be colorful, but not too over the top. I want it to be maybe a little tiny bit trendy, but not too trendy. I want it to be a little more timeless, but just really impactful. So those are actually some of the adjectives that I thought to myself when I thought about the Shift Nudge brand. And you probably remember seeing the website. You can see I've got, I'm using this funky typeface and I've got a lot of different color usage, but it's not over the top. I wanted this kind of impactful, I'm personally drawn to a lot of dark UI, and so I wanted it to reflect a little bit of my own personal style, but overall I wanted it to have this really clean, modern, fresh, yet somewhat timeless. I didn't want it to be too trendy. And so a lot of times that might be through the typeface that you select. Look at these hard edge, lowercase t, lowercase g, the hard edge V right here. It's kind of a funky typeface. And so it took me a long time to actually find this typeface and land on this design. And I just want to show you just quickly everything that I went through to get through, because this was a process of days and weeks and probably months, because I was thinking about this project forever and nothing existed. I wasn't just buying a UI kit and getting started. So first of all, you can see this artboard. I've got Shift Nudge logos everywhere. So I'm trying to play with this idea of different arrows pointing in different directions. Maybe it looks like an S and an N combined with some arrows. And I'm just playing around with tons and tons of different things. And finally, I thought that I landed on something that I liked. So I was playing around with these different colors because I did want it to be colorful. And then ultimately, I landed on this thing that I quite liked. I like these big, puffy, big rounded edge things. And I thought about playing with these shadows in here. So I brought that logo into a new document. I'm exploring with colors and exploring with gradients, and finally landed on something that I thought I liked. And for a long time, I thought, you know what? This is a nice Shift Nudge logo. It's got two arrows coming together like a shift and a nudge, and there's different colors because I wanted it to represent, a lot of different aspects of design. I wanted it to be inclusive. And so these are the ideas that I was thinking of, but eventually I just didn't quite, it wasn't quite magical yet. I had a good direction that I was still ironing out a bit, and my execution on the direction it wasn't quite converging the way I wanted it to. And it was very frustrating for me. And so I tried to expand the brand, and I thought, well, maybe if I just add some typeface and play around with, some different executions, but it almost felt like a person sitting in a chair without a head or something. It just felt slightly off in certain circumstances. And I know this is not a course about logo design necessarily, but the same thing can really apply to user interface, to websites. So you can see eventually I got to the point where I wanted this to be more simple. I wanted it to be a much simpler mark. I felt like there was too much going on. So I decided to kind of combine the colors and to combine these shapes. So instead of doing a giant arrow with an extra little kicker thing, I just kind of created these two different shapes and put them together. So it has the same kind of style, and it's still got this overlapping white area, but it's just much more simple. And I thought, you know what? I would definitely wear that on a t-shirt or have that on a pin. The other one, it's okay. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but it just doesn't feel magical. And so I was much more in line with this new design. And so then I was like, well, I need to get a bunch of icons designed. Again, the process continued. I worked on a huge variety of icons, trying to nail down the direction of, maybe I use these lines to represent typography and color, and maybe I, use gradients, or maybe I have these abstract shapes that represent each one of the modules. You can see I'm working on typography, layout, color, style. I already had the idea and the vision for what I wanted it to kind of have, but nothing was like, the execution was nice. I think this looks cool. I would be happy to put my name on that, but it wasn't. At this point, the execution was really nice, but the vision wasn't quite being met. So I was still trying to find where the vision met the execution. Going over here, I'm working on layout with maybe exploring. I would not be happy to share this work and say, look what I did, because I don't think this is very nice. But I'm still working. Maybe need to be a little bit more literal. Here are maybe this is start. Typography, you can kind of start to see where it's starting to evolve. And then I thought, oh, maybe I go super simple with these gradient things. And I felt like neither the execution nor the vision was really getting hit home on these. I do like these, but it just felt a little flat. It didn't feel magical yet. I made another version of all these icons that were even crazier. And then eventually I thought, I'm going in the wrong direction here. I need to kind of put these in context with my icon, with my logo mark, and try to get some things that actually work together, that really just matched some of the puffy qualities of the logo mark itself. Eventually, I landed on this color scheme and these colors with the stark background, And then once I started kind of laying out this potential site and found the typeface that I really enjoy, it started to make a little more sense. The vision and my execution started to kind of bridge, and I started feeling good about it. I show all of that because I don't want you to get frustrated if you're not 100% satisfied with your designs being magical. Sometimes it takes a long time to cycle through as many bad ideas, as many bad executions as you possibly can to get to that one point where you're like, oh, finally, something about this is working. What are the things working? For mine, it was these big rounded puffy colors on a dark background. And that was the one thing that I could kind of attach to that kind of finally made the design direction and the execution kind of come together. So don't get frustrated. It can be a very difficult process. Even if you know the direction you want to go in and you have an idea for how you would try to execute that, sometimes it falls short and you don't quite get to that point where it makes magic. So you just kind of have to keep pushing. You have to get feedback from others. You have to keep executing ideas, get more feedback, execute feedback. It's a big, big cycle. But it's a worthwhile pursuit to really create those magical designs. At the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with not having some earth-shattering, mind-blowing concept that is the best thing you've ever made in your entire life and it'll be the greatest thing of all time. There's nothing wrong with dialing it back and just kind of keeping it simple. But you need to at least have some direction that will lead you down a path of having a way to make sure that you're executing the way that you want to be. Because if you're just scrolling through the popular page of Dribbble while trying to design something and you're like, oh, that looks cool. Oh, that looks cool. Maybe I should have a dark background. Maybe I should use red, maybe green. Sometimes that can be helpful to get inspiration. But at the end of the day, you really have to have at least a small slice of direction. And what do you want it to look like and feel like? So it doesn't have to be some monumental concept. So I'm going to show you two more examples of minimal design directions that it's a very simple concept, but they're executed really well. And I think it works really nicely. The first one is Paul Jarvis's current website. If you don't know Paul Jarvis, he's an author. He's also a designer and runs an analytics software platform called UseFathom. Check out his website. He redesigns it often, so it might not look like this by the time you get to it, but he's using one typeface, one color, and these tiny little underlines. And I guess he is bringing in a second color for his hover states. But it's really simple. It's one font size. That's it. And his links have a tiny underline gray. That's it. And he has made the decision to give his website this huge left margin. It still works as it gets smaller, but he's made the kind of stylistic decision in his minimal approach. He's using space and a tiny little style for the hover effects. Even the titles, the H1s on his website, it's the exact same size and the exact same spacing between the H1 and the paragraph as a paragraph and a paragraph. So it's incredibly, incredibly simple. But it's very memorable. Like, you don't see websites that look like this typically. His footer it's all based on typography, and it's very, very simple. His product list is the same as his blog post list. So this is a very, very simple visual direction where the execution is absolutely critical. And a lot of times, I mean, most designs, your execution is critical, but to nail such a minimal design, it takes a lot of time and a lot of mastery over just simple typography techniques and layout techniques to kind of hit a good visual concept like this. All right, last example is this little app called Numi app. This is a little Mac calculator app. And I don't know why, I've always remembered this website. It's just so simple, it hurts. But it's also great. It's just Numi, Docs, GitHub, buy. And it's really simple. And if you look at the video, it's actually a really cool app. If you look at how it works, you just type in things like with natural language and it will give you the results over here on the right. So I actually use this app quite often as a fun little calculator app. It just has this clean, minimal look that is just memorable. You don't see most apps and most software, most websites that you'll see, they really, really try to go all out with their style and their direction. And sometimes you can bring it way down, just like the Notion website or this Numi website or Paul Jarvis's website. Sometimes the direction can be soft and your execution delivers on that softness, and it's just simple, clean, modern, and memorable. And sometimes that can make it easier to scale up a big application or to last longer, because oftentimes the simpler things are, the more scalable they are in the future, the more timeless they are for the future. So take those things into consideration when you're making your designs and you're thinking about your design direction for your projects, whatever they may be. So, design direction homework. Just to really kind of sink our teeth into this idea of using adjectives for how we would try to execute things, I'm going to have you design 2 product modules. So you could use like a dribble size artboard for both of them, or iPhone, or whatever you want. That doesn't really matter. But I want you to have 2 product cards with an image, a title, 2 to 3 sentences, and like an add to cart button. One of them is going to be selling crayons for children. So I'm thinking adjectives for that would be fun, friendly, playful, happy. So use those adjectives to design for selling crayons. You could have a colorful background or blobby shapes, whatever you think would nail kind of a children-based, fun, friendly, playful, happy kind of direction for that product card. And for the second one, exact same format with image, title, 2 to 3 sentence description, add to cart button. But this one is going to be fountain pens, exquisite, high-end fountain pens. And the adjectives that we would want to describe this one would be sharp, elegant, premium, classy, high-end, modern, something to sell these really high-end fountain pens. But it's the same exact kind of content, and I want you to execute 2 different styles with 2 different sets of adjectives to just kind of get a simple exercise under your belt with using these adjectives to design these different types of products. And so really push yourself to make decisions on the design that you personally wouldn't have done without having known what type of adjectives that are used to represent that. So best of luck, and I can't wait to see what you come up with.